June 15th, 2007, 6:13 in the morning. Ryan Carson, 26, stands at the edge of a sandstone precipice, checking the GPS coordinates against his laminated trail map as the rising sun transforms Utah's Escalante canyons from shadow to flame. Behind him, Melissa adjusts her camera strap, 24 years old and 3 weeks married. They don't know that in exactly 2 years and 3 days, a hiker will stumble upon their abandoned sleeping bags and a handcrafted basket containing remains that DNA testing will confirm as theirs. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Vermilion Cliffs as Ryan Carson finalized preparations for what was meant to be a 6-hour hike with his new wife Melissa through the Escalante region's legendary slot canyons. Their silver Subaru Outback, discovered 5 days later, contained a meticulously detailed hiking plan, complete with waypoints and estimated return times. Evidence of Ryan's characteristic attention to detail as a geological engineer from Minneapolis. Local coffee shop owner Darlene Wilkins recalled the couple's excitement that morning, noting how Melissa had spoken enthusiastically about capturing the play of light through the narrow canyon walls for her photography portfolio, while they shared breakfast at her establishment just after 7 that morning. They were glowing with that newlywed energy, Wilkins later told investigators, showing me their route on a map and promising to return to show me Melissa's photographs before heading back to their hotel in Kanab. The waitress who served them, Tanya Blackridge, remembers Melissa's laughter when Ryan spilled orange juice on their trail map. He was so methodical about blotting it dry, Blackridge stated in her initial police interview. Said something about how they'd be fine because he had the route memorized anyway. The details stick with you when you find out something like this happened. Security camera footage from Wilkins's cafe shows the couple exiting at 7:42, Ryan's arm around Melissa's waist, both wearing matching wide-brimmed hats against the anticipated desert sun. 17 minutes of unrecorded time passed before they appeared on the gas station's security system, Ryan filling their water reservoirs from an external spigot, while Melissa purchased additional sunscreen, a detail investigators would later note when finding the unused tube still in its pharmacy bag on the vehicle's passenger seat. The final confirmed sighting came from Marcus Reeves, a Bureau of Land Management ranger who passed the couple approximately 2 miles into the trail around 10:30 that morning, noting nothing unusual except their apparent delight at spotting a desert bighorn sheep on a nearby ridge. Reeves's incident report, filed 3 days later when he realized the significance of the encounter, described Ryan as carrying a moderate-sized backpack appropriate for a day hike, and Melissa as stopping frequently to photograph rock formations with a professional-grade Canon camera. They asked about water conditions deeper in the canyon system, Reeves noted. I advised caution about the weather forecast showing afternoon thunderstorms in the watershed. The male subject, Carson, showed me his weather radio and mentioned they'd turn back at the first sign of changing conditions. Security footage from a gas station near the trailhead captured their vehicle turning onto the unpaved access road at 9:17, the last electronic documentation of their existence before they stepped into the vast wilderness. The footage, grainy and captured from a distance, shows Melissa adjusting something on the roof rack while Ryan checks the tire pressure. Ordinary actions that would be scrutinized by dozens of investigators in the months that followed. A receipt found in Ryan's wallet, recovered with the vehicle, shows a purchase of 2 energy bars and a local topographical map from the same gas station, time-stamped 8:59. The clerk, seasonal employee Jason Thurman, had no recollection of the transaction among dozens he processed that day. The banality of normal life continuing, while tragedy assembled itself unseen. Kane County Sheriff's Deputy James Holbrook would later describe the initial search area as impossibly vast, a labyrinth of stone where a person could vanish within yards of a main trail and never be found without precise coordinates. The area's cellular reception was non-existent, the terrain alternating between exposed slick rock that retained no footprints and soft sand that the coming storm would erase completely. The manager at Kanab's Canyonlands Inn reported the couple missing when they failed to return for a scheduled checkout at 11 the following morning. Their room, untouched since housekeeping's visit the previous day, contained neatly packed luggage for their planned 2-week southwestern honeymoon tour. San Diego would have been their next destination, according to the detailed itinerary found on Melissa's laptop. As darkness fell on their first night missing, a storm system moved through the region, dumping nearly 2 inches of rain into the watershed, enough to trigger flash flooding through the very canyons where the Carsons had planned their hike. Weather Service data indicates the rainfall intensity peaked between 9:45 and 10:15 that evening, transforming dry washes into churning rivers within minutes. Search operations began at first light on June 17th, initially assuming the couple had sought shelter from the storm and would emerge with daylight. Ryan's mother, Patricia Carson, received the call at her Minneapolis home at approximately 10:30 that morning. The ranger said not to worry yet, that hikers often get delayed, she recounted in a 2009 interview. But something in his voice told me this was different. By the third day, media attention intensified. Local outlets initially covered the disappearance as a cautionary tale about desert hiking safety. National coverage followed when Melissa's father, Democratic State Representative Thomas Browning, made public appeals for expanded search resources. The couple's wedding photo, Ryan in a charcoal suit, Melissa in a simple white dress, standing beneath an apple tree in full bloom, became the image most Americans associated with the case. Time works against you in the desert, Search and Rescue Coordinator Martin Whitehorse explained at a press conference on day 4. If they're injured and immobile, dehydration becomes critical after 72 hours. If they're mobile but disoriented, they could travel miles from our search patterns. Behind him, a map displayed expanding circles representing the search area, a geometric representation of diminishing hope. No one yet knew about the wicker basket. No one imagined what it would contain when a hiker named Trevor Blackwell stumbled upon it 2 years later, or how it would transform understanding of what dangers truly waited in Utah's spectacular wilderness. If you're finding this investigation compelling, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps the YouTube algorithm recognize valuable content and share it with others who are seeking thoughtful explorations of unsolved mysteries. Every comment you leave not only contributes to our community dialogue, but signals to the platform that this story deserves wider attention. Now let's continue our journey into the disappearance that haunted Utah's canyon country. Dawn, June 18th, 2007. Search Coordinator Martin Whitehorse stands on a rocky promontory, watching the first helicopter lift off into air still cool from the night. His logbook entry that morning reads, Day 3, expanding grid pattern to quadrants 6 through 9, still optimistic. For 23 grueling days, search teams combed the rugged terrain using infrared drones, cadaver dogs, and technical climbing teams to access the most remote sections of the canyon system where the Carsons had disappeared. The Operation Command Center, initially a single folding table at the trailhead, expanded daily until it occupied the entirety of Escalante Regional High School's gymnasium. walls covered with topographical maps marked by colored pins representing search zones, potential water sources, and points of interest. Helicopter pilot Samantha Kingsley logged 84 flight hours over the search zone, her voice growing increasingly hollow during daily debriefs as each systematic grid search yielded nothing but the occasional boot print washed away by subsequent storms. Her flight logs, obtained through Freedom of Information requests, contain increasingly detailed observations of terrain features that might conceal two human bodies, an evolution in thinking that no one verbalized but everyone understood as days stretched into weeks. "The desert doesn't just swallow people whole," insisted Ryan's father, retired Army Colonel David Carson, who arrived from Virginia on day 3 and established an impromptu secondary command center focused on civilian volunteers. The colonel's military background manifested in meticulous organization, color-coded vests for volunteer teams, mandatory check-in procedures, and daily situation reports delivered with rigid precision that gradually frayed at the edges as exhaustion and grief accumulated behind his stoic demeanor. Family members distributed 5,000 flyers across 5 states, while volunteers from 3 counties established search patterns that extended 40 miles from the couple's last known position, an unprecedented mobilization that local officials described as the largest in southern Utah's history. Melissa's mother, Catherine Browning, maintained a constant presence at the search area's perimeter, brewing coffee for returning teams regardless of hour, her hands trembling more visibly with each passing day. By day 14, when the official search was scaled back to weekend operations only, theories ranged from accidental drowning in a flash flood to voluntary disappearance, though the couple's banking records, passport status, and conversations with family members strongly contradicted the latter possibility. The search coordinator's log for June 30th notes, "Infrared scanning continues to identify heat signatures requiring ground verification. 3 teams investigating anomalies in Sector 12. All previous anomalies identified as wildlife or geological features." Search volunteer Emmett Hawkins, a retired geology professor who had once taught Ryan in an undergraduate seminar, spoke to documentary filmmaker Lisa Chen in 2011 about the psychological toll of sustained hope. "You'd see something, a scrap of fabric, a disturbed rock formation, and your heart would race. Then the radio would crackle. False alarm. After a while, you start hoping not to find anything, because finding nothing means they might still be alive somewhere." Kane County Sheriff Eliza Morrison faced the media on day 23, her expression grave as she announced the transition from rescue to recovery operations, a technical distinction that devastated the families, but reflected the grim statistical reality of desert survival beyond 3 weeks without contact. The press conference footage shows Colonel Carson standing rigidly in the background, his face impassive while Melissa's father openly weeps beside him. 2 expressions of the same unbearable grief. "We're not giving up," Morrison stated firmly, though the resources dedicated to the search dwindled to occasional flyovers and seasonal ground sweeps, joining the tragically long list of unsolved disappearances in America's vast southwestern wilderness. Her voice, captured in high-definition audio by network news crews, contains the particular strain familiar to every official who has ever had to publicly acknowledge that hope has transformed into something else entirely. The search's bureaucratic death came in the form of a standardized incident closure report, filed July 12th, and containing a single clinical sentence under outcome. "Subjects not located. Case status changed to long-term missing persons." The document, signed by 3 different agency representatives, contains coffee stains in one corner, a humanizing imperfection in an otherwise sterile conclusion. As summer heat intensified, transforming the canyon country into an inhospitable furnace regularly exceeding 110 degrees, the mystery of what happened to Ryan and Melissa Carson settled into the collective consciousness of local communities as a cautionary tale whispered around campfires. Rangers reported increased compliance with trail registration requirements and witnessed fewer solo hikers that season, temporary behavioral changes that would eventually fade like footprints in desert sand. The Carsons' vehicle remained in the county impound lot for 6 months before Ryan's parents arranged for its transport back to Minneapolis. The officer who supervised its release noted in his report that Melissa's sunglasses still rested on the dashboard, positioned as if waiting for her return. Inside the glove compartment, investigators found an ultrasound image dated 2 weeks before their disappearance. Medical confirmation of a pregnancy the couple had apparently not yet announced to their families. Colonel Carson maintained his private search efforts for 11 more months, making 17 separate trips to Utah until his retirement savings were depleted. His final expedition notebook, later donated to the County Historical Society, ends with a single sentence. "I have walked where my son walked, and still cannot find him." In the silence that followed, as official attention shifted to newer cases and fresh tragedies, only the desert itself remained a constant witness, indifferent to human grief, keeping its secrets beneath layers of windswept sand and ancient stone. The red earth keeps its secrets buried beneath layers of time and silence, until it doesn't. On May 18, 2009, experienced backcountry hiker Trevor Blackwell veered off his planned route to seek shelter from an approaching dust storm. The National Weather Service had issued no warnings that morning. The sudden atmospheric pressure drop that created the haboob was a localized phenomenon, common in Utah's canyon country during late spring. Blackwell, a 37-year-old geology professor from Colorado State University, later described the wall of dust as a 100-foot-tall curtain of red darkness advancing across the landscape. Working his way deep into an unnamed side canyon where the narrowing walls offered protection from the stinging particles filling the air above, Blackwell followed instincts honed through 20 years of wilderness experience. His GPS unit, recovered later as evidence, showed his deliberate movement away from established trails, a decision that would rewrite the narrative of a 2-year-old mystery. "The silence after a dust storm has a quality unlike anything else," Blackwell later told investigators. "It's as if the world has been erased and redrawn, slightly different." This quality of silence surrounded him as he navigated a tight passage, barely wide enough for his frame, emerging into a small protected alcove where he immediately noticed unnatural colors against the sandstone, the faded blue and green of weathered nylon that had no place in this pristine wilderness. His discovery of 2 sleeping bags, partially buried by wind-blown sand, triggered an immediate call over his satellite phone to authorities. The timestamp on the emergency dispatch recording reads 14:27, a mundane detail marking the moment when uncertainty transformed into grim certainty for 2 grieving families. Kane County Dispatch Operator Lucinda Yazzie recorded the call with standard protocol efficiency. The transcript reveals Blackwell's measured tone, giving precise coordinates while carefully avoiding disturbing what he recognized as a potential crime scene. "I believe I've found something connected to the Carson disappearance," he stated, voice steady despite the significance of his discovery. Authorities established a coordinate lock on his position and dispatched a specialized evidence team to the remote location, a process complicated by the lingering atmospheric conditions that prevented helicopter deployment. The first responders reached Blackwell's position at 1740, approaching on foot through terrain that Sheriff's Deputy Miguel Hernandez described in his report as deliberately challenging to access, as if selected specifically for its isolation. FBI Special Agent Diana Reyes, who had monitored the Carson case since its reclassification as a possible criminal investigation 6 months after their disappearance, arrived on site at 22:15. Having driven from the Salt Lake field office and hiked the final 4 miles in darkness, Reyes began documenting the scene with methodical precision under portable LED lights that cast sharp, unforgiving shadows across the alcove. The evidence log, later partially redacted in public releases, notes the peculiar arrangement of the sleeping bags, positioned side by side, but partially unzipped and connected to form a larger shared space. Textile analysis would later confirm the matching brand and model to items purchased by Ryan Carson at REI in Minneapolis 17 days before their Utah trip, the receipt still preserved in case files. The positioning suggests they were alive when they reached this location, Reyes noted in her preliminary assessment. The deliberate joining of the bags indicates they sought shared warmth, typical of survival situations. This clinical observation carried profound implications. The Carsons had survived whatever initial incident separated them from their planned route. 20 yards from the sleeping bags, tucked into a shadowed recess in the canyon wall, sat the object that would transform the investigation. A meticulously crafted basket, woven from local desert willow branches and yucca fibers, containing deteriorated organic material that preliminary field testing indicated was of human origin. Crime scene photographer Aaron Littlefeather captured 87 images of the basket before its removal for laboratory analysis. The photographs, later described by forensic anthropologist Dr. Eleanor Whitehawk as documenting ceremonial care rather than utilitarian construction, revealed intricate patterns within the weaving. Designs inconsistent with both modern recreational crafts and traditional indigenous techniques documented in the region. The craftsmanship of the basket suggested extensive knowledge of traditional techniques, Reyes noted in her initial report, inconsistent with typical recreational activity and displaying characteristics of long-term habitation in the region. The GPS tracking data from the evidence team's movements shows a deliberate expansion of the search perimeter at first light the following morning. This methodical grid pattern revealed 2 distinct sets of footprints, preserved in hardened mud beneath an overhang, indicating that someone had visited the site multiple times after the sleeping bags had been abandoned, following a path that led deeper into an unmapped section of the canyon system. Forensic technician Sanjay Patel documented the prints using photogrammetric techniques, creating 3-dimensional models that would later be matched against known footwear databases. One set corresponds to a standard hiking boot, size 10, consistent with prints found near the Carsons' vehicle, his report states. The second set belongs to an unusual handmade sandal, with distinctive weaving patterns matching fibers found in the basket construction. As the evidence team worked to preserve the scene before an approaching weather system could compromise it further, Agent Reyes made a discovery that sent a chill through the investigation team. Etched into the sandstone wall, partially obscured by desert varnish suggesting age, were dozens of tally marks alongside simplistic human figures arranged in positions suggesting ritual significance. Dr. Marjorie Lightfoot, archaeological consultant called to the scene on day 3, refused to speculate on the marking's meaning in official statements. Her private field notes, obtained years later through FOIA requests, contain a single underlined sentence. "These are not historical indigenous markings. They represent something else entirely." The alcove that had sheltered the Carsons in their final hours now held investigators for 7 days as they methodically documented, collected, and cataloged every element of the scene. The weather system that threatened on Discovery Day finally arrived on day 4, forcing the establishment of protective tarps and raising questions about how the site had remained relatively preserved through seasons of desert extremes. "Someone maintained this place," whispered technician Littlefeather to Agent Reyes during a moment captured on body camera footage. A hypothesis that would gain devastating validation in the weeks that followed. Artifacts speak when their makers cannot. They carry histories beyond words, revealing fragments of stories otherwise lost to time and wilderness. The basket's distinctive construction provided investigators with their first actionable lead in 24 months, matching descriptions of artifacts occasionally found and reported by hikers throughout the region over the previous decade. FBI forensic anthropologist Dr. Sarah Levin identified distinctive weaving patterns involving a triple-cross technique that created both structural integrity and symbolic geometries within the vessel's design. "This isn't random craftsmanship," she noted in her preliminary report. "The patterns suggest ritualistic intent combined with functional knowledge that takes years to develop." County records revealed 5 similar reports of handcrafted baskets discovered and turned into rangers between 2000 and 2006, all dismissed as abandoned Native American artifacts until anthropologists confirmed they employed techniques inconsistent with historical tribal practices in the region. These incidents, scattered across a 70-mile radius, had never been connected until the Carson case forced authorities to re-examine previously overlooked patterns. The most disturbing revelation came through modern forensic technology. Forensic analysis of the human remains found within the basket confirmed through DNA matching that they belonged to both Ryan and Melissa Carson, though the condition of the tissue made determining cause of death inconclusive beyond establishing that sharp force trauma was present on the preserved fragments. The official report, redacted in public releases, contained details that investigative journalist Mark Holloway described as indicating methodical rather than frenzied actions. Lab technician Jasmine Rodriguez, who processed the initial samples, requested psychological counseling after completing her analysis, a detail that appears in personnel records but was omitted from official case documentation. Local historian and former wilderness guide Eleanor Whitehorse provided authorities with photographs of similar baskets she had documented while researching her book on desert hermits. Connecting them to occasional sightings of a solitary figure, locals had nicknamed the Weaver. Her field journals, shared with investigators, contained sketches of basket fragments dating back to 1997, suggesting a presence in the landscape far longer than initially suspected. "I always assumed he was just another desert eccentric," Whitehorse told Agent Reyes during their initial interview at her modest Escalante home. "The desert attracts people seeking to disappear from conventional society, usually harmlessly. I never imagined—" Her voice trails off in the recorded interview, the silence more revealing than words could be. The Weaver had been glimpsed at extraordinary distances across the landscape, but never successfully approached. Rare photographs, mostly captured by wildlife monitoring cameras or distant telephoto lenses, showed only a silhouette, a solitary figure moving across ridgelines at dawn or dusk, sometimes carrying what appeared to be gathering tools or baskets. "He moves through that country like a ghost," explained 70-year-old Garth Pemberton, whose family had ranched the periphery of the region for 3 generations. The weathered cattleman sat at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a coffee mug as he shared decades of local knowledge with investigators. "My grandfather used to leave supplies at boundary markers, canned food, matches, sometimes tools, and they'd always be gone the next time he checked, replaced with one of those baskets." This generational awareness of the figure had never translated to official reports, creating a shadow history known only to those with deep connections to the land. The investigation files now contained 23 separate accounts from longtime residents describing similar exchanges or distant sightings, spanning nearly 40 years, a phantom presence moving through the margins of civilization. Modern technology finally penetrated where human trackers could not. Satellite imagery analysis revealed a network of at least 7 potential shelter locations, sharing similar characteristics to the site where the Carsons' belongings were discovered, all positioned near seasonal water sources and naturally defensible terrain. These locations, invisible from established trails and accessible only through challenging route finding, suggested deliberate isolation rather than convenience. The operation to explore these sites involved unprecedented cooperation between agencies. Expedition teams comprised of FBI field specialists and Bureau of Land Management wilderness experts began systematic exploration of these locations, discovering evidence of long-term habitation, including sophisticated water collection systems, preserved food caches, and handcrafted tools that suggested a deep understanding of desert survival techniques. At the 3rd identified site, investigators discovered a cave entrance partially concealed by carefully positioned desert vegetation. Inside, stone shelves contained dozens of journals bound in handmade leather, their pages filled with cramped handwriting and meticulous drawings of plants, celestial observations, and anatomical sketches that forensic psychologist Dr. Lawrence Chen described as revealing a mind simultaneously brilliant and untethered from conventional reality. The 6th site yielded collections of personal items that had no practical survival value: a child's baseball cap, numerous wristwatches arranged by size, and a collection of driver's licenses dating back to 1974. Each license had been methodically altered, the eyes carefully removed with a sharp instrument. None matched missing persons from the region, suggesting a far wider geographic range than initially suspected. On the 54th day of this renewed investigation, July 11th, a team led by Agent Reyes discovered a cavern system accessed through a nearly invisible fissure in a canyon wall, containing what appeared to be the central living space of the individual they now sought. The site had been abandoned recently enough that ash in a small fire pit still contained warmth, perhaps only hours old. The sensation was unmistakable, Agent Reyes later wrote in her personal case notes. We were being watched, evaluated. The desert was no longer a passive landscape, but an active participant in a hunt where we had become the pursued rather than the pursuers. The cavern walls bore hundreds of tally marks similar to those found at the original discovery site, alongside intricate maps of the canyon systems rendered with remarkable accuracy. A stone alcove contained a sleeping area, lined with hand-woven blankets and surrounded by carefully arranged objects, each positioned with precise spacing and apparent ritualistic significance. Among these items, investigators discovered a weathered photograph of Ryan and Melissa Carson, clearly torn from one of the search posters distributed 2 years earlier. The image had been modified, their faces carefully cut out and preserved separately from their bodies, mounted on small woven frames like grotesque portraits. As the evidence team documented this disturbing tableau, a sudden dust devil, a common desert phenomenon, swept through the canyon outside, creating a hollow, whistling sound through the cavern entrance. The body camera footage from Officer Luis Mendez captures this moment, along with the reflexive way each team member reached for their weapon, an instinctual recognition that they stood in the domain of something beyond conventional understanding. The hunt for the Weaver had only begun. Some stories end not with answers, but with deeper mysteries, echoes that resonate through landscapes long after human voices have fallen silent. The journal recovered from the cavern dwelling provided the most disturbing insight into the mind of the individual now identified as Howard Finch, a former anthropology professor from Eastern Michigan University who had been declared legally dead in 1993, 7 years after vanishing during a research expedition examining indigenous survival techniques in extreme environments. University archives contained his faculty photograph, a bearded man with intense eyes and an easy smile that betrayed nothing of what he would become. FBI forensic psychologist Dr. Amelia Thornton spent 8 weeks analyzing the 17 journals recovered from various sites. Her assessment described a mind documenting its own disintegration with clinical precision, noting how the early entries contained scholarly observations of survival techniques that gradually transformed into something far more disturbing. Writing spanning nearly 15 years revealed Finch's gradual psychological transformation as he embraced isolation, documenting his growing belief that by consuming the essence of others, he could absorb their youth and vitality, a delusion that apparently culminated in the encounter with Ryan and Melissa Carson. The progression was methodically documented in increasingly erratic handwriting, the neat academic script deteriorating into cramped, urgent text that sometimes spiraled around page margins. I welcomed them as guests, as vessels of renewal, read one particularly disturbing entry dated approximately 1 month after the Carsons' disappearance. The woman carried new life within her, a triple essence offering. When they stumbled upon my gathering place, I recognized the gift the desert had provided. Laboratory analysis of the paper and ink confirmed the journal's authenticity, while graphologists verified the handwriting matched samples of Finch's academic papers preserved in university archives. What began as scholarly documentation had transformed into something that senior FBI profiler Raymond Chen described as a manifesto of delusion crafted in absolute isolation. Despite an extensive manhunt involving federal resources and local expertise, Howard Finch remained elusive, with occasional evidence of his movements discovered, but always leading to abandoned locations, suggesting he maintained awareness of the pursuit and continued to navigate the vast wilderness with unparalleled familiarity. Indigenous trackers from the Navajo Nation, brought in as consultants, expressed reluctant admiration for his ability to move without disturbing the landscape, a skill they described as requiring decades to perfect. "He's become something else out there," noted tracker Benjamin Yazzie during a debriefing session recorded in the case files. "Not fully human anymore in how he moves across the land." The families of Ryan and Melissa Carson finally held a proper funeral service on September 12, 2009, after forensic examination of the remains was complete, bringing some measure of closure to their extended ordeal, while acknowledging that full justice remained elusive. The ceremony, held in Minneapolis, drew hundreds of attendees, including Agent Reyes and other investigators who had become personally invested in the case. Colonel David Carson, Ryan's father, stood stoically beside the shared urn containing the couple's remains. The funeral program included a photograph of their ultrasound image, acknowledging the third life lost in the desert, a grandchild the families had never known was coming. Kane County implemented enhanced safety protocols for backcountry hikers, including mandatory tracking devices for permits issued in the region where the disappearance occurred, though debate continued about balancing wilderness preservation with visitor safety. Tourism briefly declined before human nature reasserted itself, the allure of spectacular landscapes overwhelming the memory of tragedy, as it always does. The search for Finch continued with diminishing resources until 2011, when budget constraints reduced the active investigation to a quarterly review of satellite imagery and occasional ranger reports. The case remained officially open but practically dormant, joining thousands of others in the limbo of unresolved justice. 5 years after the discovery of the remains, a seasonal flash flood exposed an additional cavern system containing human remains later identified through dental records as Howard Finch, positioned in a manner suggesting ritualistic suicide, surrounded by 27 meticulously crafted baskets arranged in concentric circles. The cave, located just 11 miles from the original crime scene, but in terrain so challenging it had never been thoroughly searched, contained evidence suggesting Finch had lived there for his final months. Park Ranger Michelle Thompson, who assisted with evidence recovery, described the scene as possessing an undeniable ceremonial quality, like walking into a sacred space dedicated to something beyond rational understanding. The arrangement of items suggested Finch had planned his death with the same methodical care he had applied to his desert existence. Melissa Carson's weathered camera, recovered from Finch's final dwelling place, contained intact memory cards preserving her final photographs, including stunning images of desert landscapes, loving portraits of her husband Ryan, and a distant, blurry figure watching them from a canyon rim, visible only when investigators enhanced the background of what would become her final captured moment. The timestamp on this image, 1643, on the day of their disappearance, evidence they were being stalked hours before whatever confrontation occurred. The most haunting discovery came in Finch's final journal. The last entry, dated 3 days before the flash flood that revealed his remains, contained a single sentence: "They have never left me." Beside these words lay a crude sketch of a pregnant woman standing beside a tall man, their features rendered with disturbing precision matching the Carsons. "The desert keeps its secrets," reflected Agent Reyes at the official closing of the case file in 2014. "But sometimes, if we listen carefully enough, we can hear its whispers telling us stories we may never be fully prepared to understand." The Carson families established a scholarship fund for wilderness safety education. Colonel David Carson, until his death in 2017, would return annually to the Utah desert, hiking to a vista overlooking the canyon country where his son and daughter-in-law's lives ended. Rangers reported he would sit silently for hours before leaving a small stone on an ever-growing cairn, a father's ritual of remembrance. In the vastness of Utah's canyon country, time continues its patient work, erasing footprints, smoothing stone, and gradually reclaiming the evidence of human passage. But some stories refuse to be eroded, persisting like petroglyphs carved into the collective consciousness of all who encounter them, reminding us that wilderness spaces hold both magnificent beauty and unfathomable darkness, sometimes inseparable from each other.